Hello, this is Barrett from C4 Cyber Club at Cypress College. In this video, we're going to go over the Security Plus Lab series on basic command line tool techniques. So this is essentially just going to go over some of the most common, most basic, but also most useful security tools that are used primarily by a network administrator, a server administrator, um, to assess the security posture of an organization or of their company, of their network, and it'll just generally get you a little bit more familiar with the command line if that's something new to you. So if you're taking the CIS 195 class at Cypress, this is likely the first lab of the class for you. So it's a very good way to kind of get comfortable with using Linux. And also, we will cover some of the Windows command line as well. So we'll be working on this Kali machine here, just looking at the network topology, Kali Linux machine, and the Windows 2016 server. So let's start off on the Kali machine. And we're going to go over a couple ways that you can just get help. So anytime you're about to use a tool or a particular program in Linux, there are a couple ways for you to get a little bit more information on that. So we're going to get into this ping command here in a moment. And before we dive into using it, let's get info on it. So just in the Linux terminal, I open this by coming up here to the terminal up here. Let's just type in info ping. Here. Okay, so you'll see here we get much more detailed information about this tool. So description: ping uses the ICMP protocol's mandatory echo request datagram to elicit an ICMP echo response from a host or gateway. So basically what this is saying is we could ping out from our machine here. We could send a request to another machine via the IP address, and then we will be looking for a response. So this is a way for a network administrator to test a connection to make sure that can you get a response from this other machine. Now, the way to move through an info page, you could press spacebar to basically page down. You could also press your up and down arrow, so you'll see the cursor is going down a line at a time. You could use page up, page down. You can search by pressing the /. So let's say if I search for, let's just search for ping, you'll see it jumped to the very next place where that word came. So I definitely welcome you, especially throughout all of these labs through the semester, before you really start using a tool, look at the info page. Get a little bit more details. The synopsis is going to tell you how to use it. So, you run the command, and then there's all these different options. And throughout here, you'll see descriptions on what each option will do. You'll find the -C, the count option. This is something we'll use in a moment. This will allow you to tell the command how many times you wish to ping the IP address. So now once we're done here, we could press the Q letter, the letter Q, to exit. And now you'll find in the lab where the next thing is the man pages, or it's short for manual. So let's do man ping. And now you'll see that it's very similar to the info page. In fact, if you notice, if I went back to the info page, this is often the case. You'll see it actually does pull from the man pages. So this is something that's kind of interesting with Linux because it's an open source platform. A lot of the tools, info pages, or the manual pages, they're written by various people. And in some cases, you'll find that there is a dedicated info page with slightly different information, but oftentimes it does pull from the man pages. And then there's also dash dash help as well, which is going to usually give you much more condensed help information in terms of listing options in running the program. So these are essentially three different ways to look for help on Linux commands. So very, very useful to know especially as you're learning, and perhaps even on the lab worksheet, you may want to reference the manuals to answer some questions. So let's go ahead and get into running some commands. I'm going to clear the screen. I just did a little shortcut there. Control L is a handy shortcut to clear the screen. You could also literally type clear as well. So let's go ahead and run our first ping. And we're going to do that -C4 option. And we're going to ping. This is looking like the firewall. So I recommend while you run through the lab, refer to the topology. Make sure you understand what you're doing on these commands. So we're pinging 203.0.113.1. We're essentially pinging the outside of the firewall. So we're sending a ping from here to here, and we're going to see if we get a response. Okay, and we got 4 responses because we did ask it to send 4 pings. You see ICMP request 1. I won't get into too much details. Time to live. This is basically a number that's in the case that it doesn't respond in a certain amount of time, it will drop the packet. And the time here, this is telling you how fast it took to respond. So a 0.265 millisecond response is pretty fast. And 64 bytes. This is the size of the packet. Now, a quick example. Let's say if I didn't add that -C4. This is something by default on Linux, ping will continue forever. It will send an infinite amount of pings. Now to stop this, you could press Control-C and you'll see you'll break out of that. Now on Windows defaults to only sending 4. So little difference, something that you'll come to remember as you work between Linux and Windows. Okay, so now let's I'm going to clear the screen, Control L. Let's ping another machine, 192.168.1.50. Let's see, okay, what machine is that? So that is the Ubuntu machine. We're now on the internal network. Let's see if we get a response there. Okay, so very similar. We receive the same kind of response. You see the milliseconds is a little bit higher, likely because we're going to come across a term, a command traceroute that's going to show us all the different hops through the different areas, but imagine it's slightly more time because it has to go through this firewall as well. Okay, so now let's actually move over to the Ubuntu machine. Go ahead and log in. Password is secure password. Definitely not a secure password, but for lab purposes, it's ease of use. And this is a sandbox network, so no one from the outside has access. Okay, so let's go ahead and open the terminal. And in this case, we could use ping 6. So this is referring to using IPv6. Not something you have to be fully versed on, but it's good to know that these tools are available. So in this case, we're just testing to make sure that our IPv6 local host is working correctly. That would be a successful test there. Now this is ifconfig is a very important tool, something you'll definitely use a lot throughout the upcoming labs. This is a ifconfig, essentially short for interface configuration. This is showing you ETH0. This is your network adapter. The LO refers to your local loopback device. So, and this is you'll be using this in future labs when you set up like a web server or maybe a database server. You will need this to make sure that this is running in order to communicate with your system, and it's often used when using web-based user interfaces. That's something you'll come across in the future labs. Now, in this case, with the ETH0, this is 0 is essentially means the first network adapter. Now, if this system had a second network adapter or network interface card, a NIC, you would see ETH1, and that would be listed right below this. But it only has one. We could see the IP address. We have the MAC address, which is a physical address. And we also have IPv6 address here. It gives you a lot of detailed information. There are a lot of cases where you're definitely gonna want to know your IP address. In these labs, another way that you can refer and find your IP address is, of course, through this topology. But in the real world, you would need to run commands such as this. Now, also in future labs, you will be doing things like packet sniffing, using packet analyzers like Wireshark. And in order to analyze traffic through other sources on your network, you would need to enable what's called promiscuous mode on your network adapter. So this is an example of you can use this ifconfig command to basically turn on promiscuous mode. And so we're running sudo here because this is an administrative task, and we're not currently logged in as the root account, but we need root level or administrative level access to change a configuration such as this. And now you'll see it's asking for the password for student, which is TOOR. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It is secure password. I'm getting my boxes mixed up. There we go. So what happened here is the student account is in what's called the sudoers file. And this means that our account is able to run administrative tasks, but it's just always going to ask for your password again. So it's a security failsafe, so that if somebody did compromise the system, they would still need to enter in your password to enable root level services. So anyway, so now we ran this command, we entered in the password. Now if we do ifconfig again, we're going to see promiscuous mode is now enabled. So this would be, we would now be able to do packet analyzing on this network. And another common command to enable, we're going to do sudo ifconfig eth0 all multi. So we're going to turn on all multicast mode. And we can do ifconfig again, and we can confirm that all multi is now enabled. So you're using the ifconfig command to enable. You can use it to disable these things as well. And very similarly, there is a command called IP. Now, I should actually mention that ifconfig is kind of on its way out. It technically is being sunset. So you will probably find in the next year or so, not many people will be using it, but it's still quite often used. But an alternative is IP. So let's do a couple commands here. IP link show. We could do this. It's pulling similar information. This is pulling particularly MAC address information. Now IP ADDR, IP address. This is what, actually let me clear the screen so it's a little more cleaner. This is very similar to running ifconfig. It lists the loopback device first, and then we have the ETH0 device here. Once again, we have our IP address, we have our MAC address, we have our IPv6 address. So very similar in that regard. Actually, an even shorter way of running this is just IPA, what I've kind of gotten used to doing. So it runs the exact same thing. We can run IP-S link and show specific information about packets that are being transferred. So you can see here, let me open your terminal. So keep note of these numbers here. And if I just went ahead and let's ping, what's the IP of 192.168.1.1? I'm going to ping the firewall real quick and just show you an example. So we're sending about 6 more packets. If I run this again, you could see it shows those packets that were run. So anything that goes through the network, you can get a little bit more detail with these commands and options with the IP command. Okay, great. So moving on to part 3 of the lab, we're going to switch over to the Windows machine. Now, if this is your first time using this lab, on some of the Windows machines, it's going to ask you to press Control-Delete to unlock. You won't be able to do that on your system at home. What you want to do is click on the menu up here. You could send the Control-Delete command right there. You'll see that interacted. We're going to enter in the password. Okay, very good. So once we're in Windows, we're going to open up the command prompt. And very similarly, so we have ifconfig in Linux, but in Windows it's called ipconfig. This is very similar. You'll see the default running of this. You have your IP address. You have your IPv6 address. Doesn't look like we have our MAC address here. So let's run ipconfig/all. That's going to give us much more detailed information. So we have our host name, and where is the MAC address? Right here, physical address. So this is quite often something that a network administrator is going to reference when working with machines on their network. We can get details about DNS routes and DNS resolvers. So this is where this machine is communicating anytime you make a website request. If you say, go to google.com, it's speaking to these DNS resolvers. That way it could find the IP address of google.com, and then it will take you there. Okay, so now another useful application is netstat. So let's say netstat-a, and we could view all of the TCP IP protocols on the system. This is a good way of figuring out, what ports, what protocols you have open and listening. So you may want to, if you find something open that you don't necessarily want to be, then you can close that. We could show the routing table. We can also take a look at various packet statistics, kind of like we did in Linux. So we see here packets received, packets sent. I could do an example. Once again, if I did 192.168.1.1, let's go ahead and ping that firewall again. And you'll see there how it defaulted to only sending 4 pings. And then if I did netstat-e again, you'll see that we sent out those packets, and we also received more packets back. So it's very it updates as soon as you run that command with all of the latest information. We could gain specific protocol statistics with netstat-s. Now, a lot of these commands, these are also kind of a part of incident response processes too. Like, say if a network is compromised, sometimes first thing a incident response team will do is to run these commands and dump all of this information into like a text file, which would serve as a kind of a snapshot of current network usage. Okay, we can use netstat-an to view port numbers for each networking address. So once again, very useful in determining particular ports that you have open and listening. And we could filter by protocol as well. So we could say, I want to see only ICMP. So this is related to ping requests that we've been doing. So we could see that there's been 26 received, 30 sent. If I ran more pings like I did before, we would see those numbers increase. Now, there's also a command option that you could see what executable is associated with that particular port. But you'll see here, the requested operation requires elevation. So this means we need to run the command prompt as the administrator. Right now, we're logged into a standard user account, or the lab user account, which is smart. That is good security practice. But we can switch over to running this as an administrator. So you would just come over to command prompt, right click, choose more, and let's run as administrator. Okay, so now this command prompt, let's go ahead, do netstat-ab. Now you'll see that it runs. So now much more detailed information. We could see what files, what executables are working along with which protocols. And we could even keep in mind that you could also combine any amount of these options together as well. So we do -A and B. Well, okay, and then I think we're close to wrapping up. We're going to swap back over to the Kali machine. We're going to take a look at that traceroute that I had mentioned earlier. So this is a good way. Probably the best use case of traceroute is if you're trying to determine if maybe you have a faulty router somewhere in your network. So this is going to trace the route basically it takes for like requests to communicate. So that right now we're tracing the routes to the Ubuntu machine. And essentially, we're going from here to the Ubuntu machine. So naturally, there's one hop to the firewall, and then there's the second hop to the Ubuntu machine. And okay, great. So we see that hop 1 to the firewall at 203.0.113.1, and then the second hop to 192.168.1.50, which is the Ubuntu machine. Now, this is a very simple trace route. You could do this at home in your own command line. If you're on Windows, the command is traceroute, so a little bit different. So you could run traceroute on your Windows machine or traceroute in Linux. And if you did, for example, traceroute google.com, this would show you, it would first show hop number 1, which would be your router at home, and then it would show you possibly up to 10 different routes where it hops around different routers throughout the region, throughout the nation, to eventually get to the main google.com website. So definitely very interesting. Now, another very useful command is ARP. And this will essentially show you the mappings you have on your system between an IP address and MAC addresses that were visited. So we see here that we have made connections with the firewall, and it has mapped its MAC address. So in the future, it's easier for us to communicate with that device. And then finally, we will switch back to the Windows 2016 server machine, and we could also identify the local name cache for NetBIOS. We could run nbtstat-n. It's a little confusing back there. And so that is giving us the NetBIOS local name table. So that concludes this lab. The Security Plus Lab series, going over basic command line tool techniques for security-related assessments. Great. Thanks a lot for watching.